My name is Blake Carter. I'm 35 years old, a logistics analyst in downtown Chicago, one of those people who live by spreadsheets and timestamps. Numbers make sense to me. They're clean, exact, loyal. They don't shift their story halfway through the sentence. My grandmother, Eleanor Carter, was the only person who ever told me that truth mattered more than charm. She built her life on contracts and signatures, not promises. When she passed, she left me her penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, an inheritance that felt less like wealth and more like trust. 2 years later, I was engaged to Samantha Hayes, a woman whose ambition could light up a skyline. I thought we were building something together. But when I returned from a 3-day work trip, my keycard didn't work, my clothes were boxed, and strangers were carrying away my grandmother's furniture. Samantha stood in the doorway, calm and perfect, telling me it was just business. She'd sold the penthouse, my inheritance, to erase her brother's debts. That was the day I learned love can forge your signature faster than a thief can pick a lock. And everything that came next started with a small black USB drive engraved B.C., waiting for me to finally open it. The elevator doors opened to a noise that didn't belong. Boxes scraping, men grunting, the thud of wood against marble. My grandmother's furniture, her hand-carved dresser, her mirror, and the old oak table that still smelled faintly of lemon were being hauled out by strangers. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "What the hell is this?" One mover barely looked up. "Full clearance order, sir." "Everything goes today." I froze. Clearance? By who? A voice I knew too well answered from behind me. By me. Samantha's heels clicked on the marble like punctuation marks. Perfect hair, perfect face, perfect calm. She carried herself like she'd just closed another $1 million listing. "You did what?" "It's done, Blake." Her tone was steady, like she was explaining a business decision. "The sale went through this morning." "You sold the penthouse?" I felt my throat tighten. "Our penthouse," she said, emphasizing the word. "You weren't around, and Paul needed help. I had to act fast." "Paul? You sold my grandmother's home to pay off your brother's debts?" She folded her arms. "You're being dramatic. It wasn't really yours, Blake. The paperwork was incomplete. You didn't even finish the probate filing. Legally, it was still pending." My chest burned. "You forged my authorization." Her eyes flicked away. That half-second silence told me everything. I walked past her to the desk. The top drawer was empty. The USB Grandma had given me was the one I'd kept there since the funeral was gone. "You took something," I said quietly. "I took care of things," she replied, voice turning cold. "You're welcome." A laugh escaped me, bitter and dry. "You're unbelievable." "You always said you trusted me," she said, stepping closer. "Now's your chance to prove it." I shook my head, fighting to breathe. On the counter lay a thick envelope. My name was printed neatly on the front. B. Carter. Inside was an eviction notice, stamped by the county clerk's office, dated 2 days ago. My signature was at the bottom, digital, neat, and fake. I looked up at her. "You forged my name." "Don't start something you can't finish," she said, rushing past me toward the door. "It's done, Blake. Move on." The door shut softly behind her. The mover's footsteps faded. The apartment fell into an unnatural quiet, every echo hitting harder than words ever could. I stood alone in the space that had been my last connection to Grandma. My reflection stared back from the empty window pane, small, humiliated, weightless. I turned toward the shelf. Grandma's framed photo leaned sideways, and the glass was cracked. I lifted it and something rattled inside. When I peeled the backing open, a small black USB drive fell into my hand, the metal engraved with 2 letters, B, C, my initials. And suddenly, everything in the room felt alive again, like Grandma had left me one last way to fight back. I sat on the floor of what used to be my living room, laptop balanced on a cardboard box, the black USB drive glinting in my hand. For a minute, I just stared at it. Grandma's initials, her neat engraving. The only thing in this entire apartment that still felt like the truth. I slid it into the port. The screen blinked, loaded, then a single folder appeared. Eleanor Carter. Inside it are 3 files. 1 audio, 2 PDFs. My throat tightened as I double-clicked the audio file. Her voice filled the room. Soft, fragile, but steady. "Blake, if you're hearing this, it means you found what I couldn't trust anyone else with. Smiling thieves come in many faces, darling. Never give your name away on a dotted line unless you can trace the ink." I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. I hadn't heard her voice in almost 2 years. She sounded alive, present, sitting right next to me. The first PDF opened to a scanned property title with her signature at the bottom, dated 6 months before she passed. My name was printed right beside it, sole beneficiary Blake Carter. The second file was a ledger, with all numbers and transaction codes. Routine until I noticed one line circled in red ink, scanned exactly as it must have looked on her desk. C-1178409X, transfer, hold, pending signature validation. But the signature validation line was blank. She'd meant to finalize it, and someone else had done it instead. A fourth item appeared as I scrolled down a folder marked Ledger, Proof, Locked. Encrypted, password required. I stared at the blinking cursor in the password field, fingers hovering above the keys. Grandma was old-fashioned. She used dates for everything. I tried her birthday. Nothing. Then the date of her passing. No luck. Finally, I typed the date she gave me the silver pen. The day I got my first job, 0609. The folder opened. Inside was a single text file. Oak Park Notary, 1435. That was it. A timestamp. Oak Park was where she'd lived before moving downtown, and 1435, the exact time she'd signed the codicil that I'd found in the first chapter's file. The realization hit hard. Grandma had notarized her last legal act in Oak Park, not in the city. If the official sale paperwork listed a Chicago notary, it was forged. I replayed her voice again, quieter this time. "If they touch what's yours, don't fight them with anger. Fight them with proof." The ache in my chest turned sharp, precise. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was suspicion sharpening into resolve. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled until I found the name I hadn't used in years. Alan Reyes, my grandmother's attorney. The cursor blinked beside his number. I hit call. When his familiar voice answered, I didn't bother with small talk. "Alan," I said quietly, "I think someone forged a notary seal on Grandma's property transfer." There was a pause on the other ND, and then a slow, careful reply. "Bring everything you have to my office, Blake. Tonight." Alan's office smelled like old paper and bitter coffee. The walls were lined with books that hadn't been opened in years: corporate law, estate law, contra and CTs, and property transfer codes. Everything here felt deliberate, organized, and slow. Exactly the opposite of how my world had spun in the last 48 hours. He sat behind his desk, half-moon glasses perched on his nose, examining the printed pages I'd brought from the USB. I'd expected shock, maybe sympathy. What I got was a quiet frown and a muttered, "These are too clean." He tapped the title page with a pen. "Look at this seal. The notary stamp is correct, but the digital shadow under it shows that faint second circle. That's not a scanning error. That's duplication. Someone overlaid a notary seal template." I leaned forward. "So it's fake?" He tilted his head. "Not entirely. It's forged from a real seal, which means whoever did this had access to legal notary credentials." He flipped to the next page, eyes narrowing. "Transfer code C-1178409X. Does that mean anything to you?" "Yeah," I said. "It's in the ledger on the USB." Alan typed it into his system. The registry pulled up a property transfer log, but the timeline was off. "Here." He turned the screen toward me. "According to Cook County records, the escrow cleared on March 14th, but your grandmother's probate filing wasn't opened until March 16th. That means someone processed a property release before she was legally deceased." I blinked. "That's impossible." He sighed. "It's illegal." The weight of his words settled like a stone in my chest. Alan leaned back, interlocking his fingers. "You said the drive came from her directly?" "It was hidden in her photo frame, engraved with my initials." He nodded. "Then she expected this. Smart woman. She probably left it for you, knowing someone would tamper with the estate. I swallowed hard. So what do we do now? He started jotting notes in his legal pad. First, we confirm whether the forged seal links to a registered notary. That'll tell us where the chain of documents breaks. Second, I want you to request a property registry Log G complete escrow timeline, including e-signatures. The timestamps will either save you or bury you. I took a slow breath. What about Samantha? He looked at me carefully. Do you trust her enough to ask? The silence in the room answered for me. Alan clicked his mouse again, scanning through the database. There's one more thing. He enlarged a field on the screen to a digital signature line. Every electronic property transfer requires at least one secondary verification. He pointed to the name. My stomach turned. Samantha Hayes e-signed, timestamp March 12th, 1448, 2 days before Grandma's death. Alan exhaled through his nose. Well, he said softly, there's your trail. I stared at the monitor, the glow reflecting off my hands. The proof wasn't just there. It was timed, precise, criminal. Alan shut the file and looked up at me. Blake, he said, someone didn't just steal your home. They stole her last decision. I didn't respond. I just stood, picked up the folder, and walked out into the cold Chicago night, every step echoing like a countdown to war. Her condo smelled like lavender and deceit. I stood in the doorway, trying to keep my pulse from drowning out my thoughts. Samantha opened the door with that polished smile, the one that used to calm me, the one that now felt rehearsed. Blake, she said smoothly, stepping aside. I was wondering when you'd show up. I stepped in without answering, phone already recording in my pocket. We need to talk about the sale. She sighed dramatically, walking toward the kitchen island, her heels clicking like a metronome. Still on that? She poured herself wine. You said I could handle the sale while you were away. You don't remember? The way she said that was low, patient, like I was a child forgetting his homework. Orc lit a slow fire under my skin. I said you could look at offers, I snapped. Not forge my signature. She tilted her head, smiling. Forge? Blake, that's a big accusation. She took a sip. You signed it electronically. Maybe you just forgot. Happens all the time with DocuSign. People don't read what they approve. My hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Alan found a timestamp your e-signature dated 2 days before Grandma died. Her face didn't even twitch. Alan Reyes still breathing? That's adorable. He was old when dinosaurs walked Lakeshore Drive. I'm serious, Sam. I know, she said, setting her glass down. That's what makes this funny. Her calm made me colder. Who's the buyer? She hesitated barely, but enough for me to catch it. A private investment group. I leaned closer. Paul's name is on the escrow record, isn't it? Her eyes darted up. I'd hit it. I checked the registry, I said, voice low. He's listed as the managing member of the LLC that bought it. You sold my inheritance to your brother. She set her glass down harder this time. You're twisting things. No, I said. You are. And if you think the county clerk won't find those forged documents, you're wrong. She laughed, light, sharp, cruel. You really don't get how this works, do you? You won't win against paper, Blake. The documents are filed. The sale's clean. You can scream fraud all you want, but no one overturns a notarized deed. Her words hit harder than I expected, and yet, beneath the sting, something clicked a word she used. Notarized. I stepped back, pretending to calm down, pretending to give up. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I'm wasting my time. She smirked. Now you're learning. I left before the mask on my face cracked. The elevator doors closed, sealing in my fury. My phone was still recording, the red dot glowing faintly. Her laughter echoed through the playback as I walked to my car. At a red light, I opened the escrow document I'd downloaded earlier, the one Alan had flagged. A string of numbers caught my eye. Serial 449191. I scrolled through the USB's ledger file on my laptop. The same serial number blinked back at me from Grandma's records dated months earlier. Same code, same transaction path. Samantha hadn't just lied. She'd recycled my grandmother's pending transfer file to create the fake sale. The proof was there. I just needed the right hands to expose it. Alan's office lights were dim when I walked in the next morning, but his phone was already on speaker. A man's voice buzzed through, flat and tired, the sound of someone who's lived too long in spreadsheets. "This is Lionel Pierce," Alan said, nodding toward the phone. "Senior Compliance Officer, First Midwest Bank. He owes me a favor." "Morning," Lionel said. "You're the grandson, right? The one with the USB?" "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Blake Carter." "Well, Blake, your grandmother kept meticulous records," he said, tapping keys on his end. "You mentioned serial number 44919? "Correct." I heard him exhale. "That's not just any transaction. That serial traces to a holding account registered to Thornbridge Capital, a shell LLC incorporated in Belize 2 years ago. Guess whose U.S. correspondent account handled the wire?" Alan looked up at me. "Paul Hayes?" "Bingo," Lionel said. 2 deposits hit his name within 48 hours of the property transfer. Total of $780,000. Not bad for family business. I gripped the edge of the desk. So the sale wasn't just fake. It was a laundering move. Alan nodded grimly. And Samantha facilitated it under real estate privilege. Lionel continued. "One more thing. The original escrow timestamp doesn't match the wire logs. The escrow closed at 09:14 on paper, but the funds weren't transferred until 15:42, 5 hours later. That's textbook backdating." I sat back, heart pounding. "Meaning?" "Meaning the sale existed before the money did," Lionel said. "Which means someone fabricated the closeout receipt and inserted it into the audit trail. Whoever did this knew how to manipulate document metadata." Alan scribbled notes furiously. "We can use this," he said. "Falsified timestamps, shell accounts, fake notary, that's federal territory." My head spun. Grandma's warning echoed, "Trace the ink." After Lionel hung up, Alan turned to me. "Blake, this isn't just about your penthouse anymore. You've got evidence of wire fraud and document forgery across state lines. You need to go higher than the county court." "You mean the FBI?" "Exactly." The words hung in the air, heavy but inevitable. That afternoon, I sat at my desk in my small apartment, what was left of my life, and opened a blank case intake form on the FBI Financial Crimes Division portal. Every field I filled tightened something inside me. Name, transaction serial, account holder, date of fraud, evidence attached. I uploaded the USB files, Lionel's report, and the notarization scans Alan had verified. My cursor hovered over the Submit button for a long second. Then I clicked. Validation washed over me first, like finally exhaling after weeks underwater. Then came fear. If Samantha or Paul caught wind of this, they wouldn't stay quiet. But fear couldn't compete with the steady hum of truth forming in the data. I closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Mr. Carter?" A crisp female voice. "This is Agent Dana Holt, FBI Financial Crimes. You just submitted some interesting material." I swallowed. "Yeah." A pause, then. "We've been tracking that shell account for months." The line went silent and I felt the shy. This wasn't personal anymore. It was federal. Agent Dana Holt's office was smaller than I expected. No big screens or flashing caseboards, just 2 file cabinets, a desk covered in labeled folders, and the faint hum of an overworked computer tower. She sat across from me in a gray blazer, posture military straight, eyes scanning me like a barcode. "So," she said, flipping through my printed evidence packet, "you're telling me your fiancé sold a property that legally belonged to you using a forged notary, a shell company, and your dead grandmother's title documents?" When she said it out loud, it sounded insane. "Yes," I said evenly, "and I can prove every part of it." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "You're aware that filing a false report to a federal agency is a felony?" "I'm aware," I replied, keeping my tone flat, "which is why I brought the proof." I reached into my bag and placed the USB drive on her desk. This came from my grandmother. Holt hesitated, then plugged it into her computer. A few clicks later, Grandma's voice filled the room. "If they touch what's yours, don't fight them with anger." Fight them with proof. Holt's expression shifted barely, but enough. She turned the screen toward me. This voice memo is timestamped a week before her death. Verified metadata, unaltered. She clicked through the PDFs, eyes narrowing. Escrow mismatch, false notary overlay, wire trace to a flagged offshore account. She leaned back in her chair. All right, Mr. Carter, you've got my attention. She opened a drawer and pulled out a single-page form. This is a cooperation agreement. It means you'll work with us under confidentiality. You share everything, you stay quiet, and if we move forward, you'll be under federal protection from retaliation. I picked up the pen and signed. My hand didn't shake this time. Good, she said, collecting the papers. We'll start with forensic verification. My tech team will authenticate the files and run cross-references on the notary IDs. In the meantime, I'll issue a subpoena for Samantha Hayes' bank account and phone records. If your story checks out, we'll see movement fast. Her tone was professional, detached, but not dismissive. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint pull of control returning. As she gathered the USB into an evidence bag, Holt looked at me over her glasses. Stay silent about this. Don't warn her, don't confront her again, don't post anything online. People like her don't confess, they panic. And when they panic, they make mistakes. That's what we need. I nodded slowly. Understood. Good, she said, standing. We'll be in touch. I left the federal building with the kind of quiet pride that didn't show on my face but burned somewhere under my ribs. For once, the system wasn't against me. It was listening. Back in my car, I sat for a minute, watching rain streak the windshield. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown number. I answered, thinking it might be Alan, but it was her voice. Blake, Samantha said, too calm, too rehearsed. We need to talk. Now. Her tone wasn't apologetic, it was scared. Samantha chose the Restaurant and Tea, a quiet bistro downtown with soft jazz, dim lighting, and too much pretense. It was the kind of place she used to love showing off, ordering wine she couldn't pronounce just to hear herself say it. When I walked in, she was already seated by the window, dressed in a black silk blouse, makeup flawless. For anyone watching, she looked like a woman meeting her fiancé for reconciliation. For me, she looked like a crime scene waiting to happen. Blake, she said as I approached, her voice soft, calculated. Thank you for coming. I slid into the booth across from her, keeping my hand steady as I adjusted my jacket just enough to tap the hidden recorder clipped inside my pocket. You said you wanted to talk. She exhaled, trying to look vulnerable. I owe you an apology. Do you? I asked, my voice even. Yes. She leaned forward, lowering her tone. I never meant for things to get that bad. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, I said quietly. She shook her head, eyes darting to the window before returning to me. Paul was drowning. His business collapsed and he owed people you don't mess with. They needed the money fast. I thought if I used the title just temporarily, it would buy him time. I didn't move, didn't blink. I let the silence stretch until she filled it again. I swear, I planned to fix it before you got back, she continued. But Paul found a notary, a guy in Evanston, who handled fast paperwork. He said it would all look legitimate. I didn't ask questions. I just signed. There it was. The first real admission. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. So you forged the transfer. Her jaw tightened. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? Her eyes flashed, and for a moment the mask slipped. I did what I had to do, Blake, for family. You wouldn't understand that. I leaned back, letting my disgust settle behind a calm facade. You're right, I said. I wouldn't. Her tone softened again. Look, maybe we can still fix this. If you tell your lawyer to back off, I'll get Paul to pay you back. We can start over. I smiled faintly, nodding like a man on the edge of forgiveness. Maybe, I said. Maybe we can. She smiled back, relieved, as if she'd just talked her way out of everything. Dinner ended with polite words and false warmth. I walked her to her car, hugged her briefly, and told her to call me tomorrow. Then, as soon as her taillights disappeared into the street, I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. I typed one line to Agent Holt. She confessed. Fake notary, Evanston, recording secured. I hit send, my thumb trembling just once. The reply came less than a minute later. "Good work, Blake. Stay out of sight tonight. We move at dawn." The next morning, dawn came with sirens instead of sunlight. I stood half a block away from a dingy brick building in Evanston, while black SUVs and unmarked sedans lined the curb. Agents in navy windbreakers moved in formation, their voices crisp, deliberate, and efficient. The sign above the door read, "Oakview Document Services," the notary office Samantha had mentioned. Agent Holt stepped out of her vehicle, sunglasses on, jaw tight. "Stay here," she said to me. "You're a civilian, not part of this raid." I nodded, though every nerve in me wanted to follow her inside. Through the glass, I caught glimpses of the chaos. Papers flying, a printer yanked from a desk, a terrified man in his 50s shoved against the wall in handcuffs. The agents worked fast, precisely, like they'd done this 100 times before. 20 minutes later, Holt emerged with a flash drive in a sealed evidence bag and a look that told me everything had just shifted. "We got him," she said. "And we got your number literally." She led me to her car, flipping through her notepad. "The notary's name is Walter Briggs. He cracked fast. Said he was paid under the table to fabricate a series of property certifications using copied seals from legitimate licenses. Your file transfer code, C1178409X, was one of them." I let out a shaky breath. He admitted it? He admitted everything. Even gave us a list of clients. Guess who's second on the list? I didn't need to guess. Samantha Hayes. Holt nodded, eyes glinting. We also recovered a digital ledger from his workstation serial 449191. It matches the one your grandmother logged on her USB. I froze. "The same serial?" "The exact same," she confirmed. "And it links directly to the Thornbridge Capital Shell in Belize. Your grandmother's digital ledger from the USB matches our federal audit trail byte for byte. Chedituin." For the first time in weeks, I felt something solid beneath me, truth verified, indisputable, undeniable. So what happens now? Holt started typing on her tablet. "We prepare for a grand jury submission. Fraud, wire laundering, false notarization, and identity forgery. Paul Hayes and Samantha Hayes will be served federal warrants within 24 hours. Her tone was sharp, controlled, but I could hear the edge of satisfaction underneath. I nodded slowly. "It's really happening." "Yeah," she said. "You did good, Blake. You gave us what we needed to finish a long trail." Vindication hit like oxygen. For the first time, the weight in my chest lightened. Grandma's warning, "Gee, fight them with proof," had led exactly here. We drove back toward the city, the evidence bag sitting between us like a loaded truth. Holt's phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. Her expression shifted from calm to alarm in seconds. "What?" I asked. She hit the brakes. "Samantha Hayes' apartment is empty. Neighbors say she cleared out last night." My pulse spiked. "She ran?" "Not yet," Holt said, already dialing. "But she's trying." The car turned hard into traffic, lights flashing red and blue across the glass. Somewhere out there, Samantha was vanishing just hours before her name would hit a federal arrest warrant. They found Samantha's car at dawn, abandoned on the edge of a rundown industrial block near the river, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. No luggage, no phone, no trace. Just a half-empty coffee cup in the console and a parking ticket time-stamped at 3:42 a.m. Agent Holt stood beside the car, jaw tight, hands on her hips. "She didn't run," she said. "She was dropped off." "By Paul," I said quietly. Holt nodded once. "That's what I'm betting." The warehouse across the street belonged to one of Paul Hayes' import companies, at least on paper. According to the records Lionel from the bank had pulled, it was the last stop for several wire transfers tied to Thornbridge Capital. Holt's team began sweeping the area, methodical and silent. By noon, we were back downtown, reviewing footage with Mr. Klein, the old building manager from Grandma's penthouse. He'd called after hearing about the investigation. His small office smelled of dust and old varnish, walls lined with a dozen aging security monitors. "I keep backup drives for every tenant's storage floor," Klein said, pulling out a hard drive the size of a paperback. "Something told me you'd want to see this." Holt plugged it into her laptop. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp read March 13th, 02:17 a.m., the night before the fake sale. Paul appeared first, wearing a baseball cap and gloves. Behind him, another man I didn't recognize carried a box cutter and a stack of manila folders. "That's the building storage room," I said, leaning forward. "Those are Grandma's old files." Holt paused the frame. "Let's see what he's taking." She zoomed in. The label on one folder caught the light just enough to make the handwriting visible. Property Eleanor Carter, Codicil, Deed Serial 449191. My stomach dropped. Paul looked around, then ripped the folder open and pulled out the original sale contract, my grandmother's name scrawled beside a printed notary seal. He slipped it into a duffel bag. The timestamp on the footage? 02/22/54, and Holt opened my grandmother's USB files and pulled up the internal log timestamps. 02:22/54 appeared again, next to a data entry update the moment the fake transfer had been uploaded into the escrow registry. She stared at the screen. "That's exact alignment," she said. Physical action matching digital upload. The anxiety that had been twisting in my gut turned into something colder and focused rage. Holt looked at me. This connects him directly to the forged transfer. He wasn't covering for Samantha. He was running the fraud. We fast-forwarded through the footage. At 02:48, Paul reappeared. This time, he wasn't stealing. He was destroying. He fed sheets of paper into a portable shredder, one after another, his face pale under the flickering fluorescent light. I recognized the document in his hands before it disappeared into the blades, the fake bill of sale for the penthouse, stamped and notarized under my name. "Pause it," I said. Holt froze the frame. Paul's face filled the screen. Half-lit, guilty, unmasked. "That's it," she whispered. "We've got him on tape destroying evidence." The room was silent except for the faint whir of the paused video. Holt exhaled slowly, then turned toward me. "Blake," she said, "this isn't just fraud anymore." She hit save, exporting the file for evidence. Outside, sirens began to rise again. Inside, the monitor flickered one last frame, Paul looking straight into the camera as if he knew someone was watching. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and nerves. The federal seal loomed above the bench, gold catching the morning light that filtered through narrow windows. A dozen strangers, the grand jury sat silently. Notebooks open, eyes trained on the stack of binders Agent Holt carried in like evidence-shaped bricks of truth. She placed the USB drive on the table first, sealed in its clear plastic bag, then began her presentation with the precision of a surgeon. "Item 1, she said, addressing the jurors. A digital ledger extracted from the personal effects of the late Eleanor Carter, confirming ownership transfer codes and timestamps inconsistent with the reported sale date. Item 2, a notarized voice memo, authenticated by forensic analysis, indicating explicit intent to bequeath the Lakeview property solely to her grandson, Blake Carter." My name echoed off the marble, clinical, detached. Holt clicked her remote. The screen lit up with evidence images, property deeds, bank logs, serial 449191, flashing at the bottom like a ghost that refused to rest. "Item 3, she continued. Escrow records showing a mismatch of 5 hours between property closeout and funds transfer, proving backdated documentation. I watched the jurors lean forward, their pens scratching notes. Then she gestured to me. "Mr. Carter, please take the stand." The clerk swore me in. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I was on a business trip," I said. "When I returned, my fiancée had sold my grandmother's penthouse without my consent. The documents carried my digital signature, which I never authorized. I found the USB in my grandmother's photo frame. She left it as evidence. Did you alter any of the files?" Holt asked. "No," I said. "Every timestamp, every signature, it's all hers." She nodded, and the next 20 minutes played out like a documentary with no soundtrack. Surveillance footage of Paul stealing the deed. The shredded documents were retrieved from his warehouse. The fake notary's confession video. Every piece fit together too neatly for denial. When it ended, the defense table was silent. Samantha sat there pale, eyes ringed red. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something, but she didn't answer. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stood. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I want to change my plea." The room held its breath. "Too guilty. On all counts, fraud, forgery, conspiracy." Paul's attorney slammed his palm on the table, whispering harshly to his client, but Paul just stared forward, jaw tight. Holt didn't even smile. She simply said, "The government accepts." Later that afternoon, after deliberations, the judge read the indictments. Paul Hayes, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction. Samantha Hayes, conspiracy and forgery, maximum term reduced for cooperation. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was exhaustion shaped like justice. Relief, muted and steady. The kind my grandmother would have called dignified victory. Whether then court recessed, the judge glanced down at his notes. "Mr. Carter," he said, adjusting his glasses. "There's one more matter. Your grandmother's codicil references an unclaimed clause regarding restitution, something about proceeds retained in trust. We'll reconvene on that tomorrow." I nodded slowly, heartbeat climbing again. Unclaimed clause. Proceeds retained. Whatever Grandma had hidden in that contract, her last safeguard was still waiting to be found. The courthouse was quieter the next morning, and no press, no crowd, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of conclusion in the air. Alan sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, flipping through the last of the estate files. His pen tapped against a folded document stamped in red. Addendum Codicil Clause C. He adjusted his glasses, leaned closer, and whispered, "This is what the judge meant yesterday. Your grandmother inserted a backup clause one nobody caught until the audit." I frowned. "Backup clause?" He nodded. "It's elegant, really. She wrote that if the property was ever transferred without verified authorization, the total sale VA, Solu Market or Il Isit would be returned as restitution to the rightful heir. That's you. The clause uses the term irrevocable reversionary compensation. Legally bulletproof. I stared at the page, the neat lines of Grandma's handwriting, still strong and deliberate even in her final months. She planned for this. Alan smiled faintly. She knew people, Blake, especially greedy ones. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, crisp and direct. After review of the codicil and financial trail presented, he said, "This court approves restitution to Mr. Blake Carter in the amount equal to the illegal sale of $780,000 and reinstates ownership of the Lakeview penthouse to the rightful heir, as originally intended by the decedent, Eleanor Carter." The gavel struck once, sharp as final punctuation. For a moment, the sound echoed through the chamber, clean and absolute. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Alan clasped my shoulder. "You got it back," he said softly. But it wasn't just the property. It was her memory, her trust, her faith in me. The numbers, the documents, the truth, they'd finally aligned like she always said they would. Outside, in the hallway, Agent Holt waited. She looked less guarded today, though her eyes were still sharp as steel. "Congratulations," she said, offering her hand. Justice served by the numbers. I shook it, the weight of everything settling quietly between us. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Maybe," she said with a faint grin. "But your grandmother did most of the legwork before you were even in the game." We both laughed briefly, the kind that comes only when the fight's finally over. Alan excused himself to file the final paperwork. Holt walked me to the building's exit. "We'll wrap the case within the week," she said. "Paul's flipping on his offshore contacts. You'll get updates from the Bureau's restitution office." "Good," I said. "I think I've had enough surprises." She smirked. "You sure about that?" Before I could answer, she handed me a plain envelope, marked Federal Evidence Division. "What's this?" I asked. "Came in this morning," she said. "Addressed to you." I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an official letterhead, one line printed in bold. "Pending investigation. Trust to BC2. Offshore asset disclosures." I looked up at Holt. She met my eyes, expression unreadable. "Seems your grandmother might have left behind more than one account." The envelope trembled in my hand. The case was closed. But the story clearly wasn't. It was just past midnight when I finally stepped back into the penthouse, my penthouse. The air still smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil, exactly how Grandma used to keep it. Boxes were stacked in corners, the furniture draped in sheets, but the city lights glittered through the glass walls like a welcome back I didn't deserve. I dropped my jacket on the couch and sat at her old writing desk. The black USB, the same one that started everything, rested beside my laptop. I hadn't touched it since the court ruling, but tonight something told me to. When I plugged it in, the screen flickered. A new folder blinked into existence. Final message. It hadn't been there before. My heart kicked. The file auto-opened and her voice filled the room, soft and steady, just like I remembered. Blake, if you're hearing this, it means the papers are finally in order. I froze, every muscle in me still. You did what I hoped you would. Follow the trail, not the noise. I knew the day might come when charm would try to outsmart truth. That's why I left you more than a home. The file clicked and an image appeared on screen. A scanned handwritten note in her looping script. Trust your logic more than your love, my boy. Love blinds. Numbers don't. I smiled, despite the sting behind my eyes. She'd always said that back when I was still naive enough to think honesty was common. The recording continued. There's one more account in your name. I set it up before my health began to fail. You'll find it through the second ledger, the one labeled BC2. The routing number is there, but it will only unlock once your legal title is restored. On the screen, text began to type itself in real time as if triggered by her words. A series of numbers appeared. Account routing, Sir Hoon 1098, BC2 1170. Beneath it, a single phrase blinked, Trust Fund Reversion. I sat back, stunned. Grandma hadn't just protected my inheritance, she'd built an entire failsafe. If anyone tampered with her estate, the remaining trust would revert to me once ownership returned. A digital insurance policy hidden behind sentiment. The laptop chimed softly and a small window popped up. Funds verified pending claim authorization. Awe washed through me, slow and deep. She'd outsmarted them all. Even gone, she was still orchestrating every detail, every safeguard, every quiet act of faith in the only language trusted said evidence. I leaned back, watching the city lights shimmer across the lake. The noise of the last few months, the courtrooms, betrayals, sand irons finally began to fade. For the first time since she died, I felt peace. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." The laptop screen dimmed. I reached to close it, then my phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. I answered, half expecting silence. "Blake," came Agent Holt's voice, calm but urgent. "We need to talk about that account." The call cut off before I could reply. On the screen, the routing number flashed once more, then a new message appeared beneath it. Trust, BC2. Asset Disclosure, Phase 2. The cursor blinked, waiting. The investigation concludes with Blake's full ownership of the penthouse restored and restitution paid from the seized shell company. Samantha and Paul are sentenced under financial fraud charges. Blake doesn't gloat. He simply signs the final document before the notary, places the silver USB beside the paper, and whispers a quiet, "Thank you, Grandma." His victory isn't revenge, it's order. Numbers, signatures, and timestamps delivered justice where emotion once clouded judgment. He moves back into the penthouse with minimal furniture, quiet city lights below. The same space that once echoed with betrayal now hums with peace and a lesson etched deep. Truth needs no defense when it's written in ink and time.